If you bring Japanese into my state, I promise they will be hanging from every tree. Nels Smith, Governor of Wyoming, to Milton Eisenhower, who was part of the War Relocation Authority.
During World War II, people of Japanese descent from Oregon, Washington, and California were incarcerated at one of 10 relocation camps in the country as the result of Executive Order 9066 from President Franklin Roosevelt. One of these was the Heart Mountain Relocation Center in Park County, Wyoming. At its largest, it held more than 10,000 people, making it the third largest town in the state. To put this in perspective, the towns by Heart Mountain, Cody and Powell, had populations of 3,000 and 2,000 respectively. Residents were at the camp from August 12, 1942 to November 10, 1945.
The camp consisted of 468 barracks-style buildings sectioned into 20 blocks that served as administration areas and living quarters. The tar paper barracks were divided into apartments, some single rooms and others slightly larger to accommodate families of up to 6. The largest apartments were single rooms measuring 24 feet to 20 feet. Each unit was furnished only with a stove for heat, a light fixture in the center of the room, and an army cot and 2 blankets for each person. Each block had a mess hall, unpartitioned toilet and shower facilities, and a laundry area.
After the war was over and the Japanese left the camp, the United States government sold barracks for $1 apiece. The distribution of the barracks happened in 3 separate drawings from 1947 to 1949 to homesteaders who each received both farm acreage and 2 barracks buildings. Thousands of potential farmers applied for the first drawing alone, and only 215 names were drawn, 1/10 of those who were eligible. The prerequisites for these post-war homesteaders were that they had to be veterans with some cash equity and farming experience. Some of the former inmates wanted to stay because they had nothing to return to back in their formal states. However, they were prevented from homesteading due to an alien land law passed by the Wyoming legislature in 1943, which was revoked only in 2001.
Some barracks were transformed into modest living accommodations and comfortable homes that remain in the area today. Some of the barracks buildings that were makeshift homes during the early parts of the farming lives were either moved or converted into barns and sheds. Some were destroyed in fires. Still, others were scattered throughout the Bighorn Basin and beyond. If not transformed into houses, they became stores, motels, and even churches. There are even barracks that can be found as far away towns as Riverton and from Powell.
In 1998, Sharon Yamato and Stan Honda created a book entitled Moving Walls, Preserving the Barracks of America's Concentration Camps. This was later turned into a documentary and photo exhibit. Many of the people they interviewed had different stories about their experiences around the time Heart Mountain Relocation Center was still running, as well as their experiences with the barracks.
Takashi Hoshizaki was one of 63 men at the Heart Mountain concentration camp who objected to being drafted as long as his civil rights were being denied and his family held in detention. He is perhaps one of only a few still alive to talk about what happened. Fortunately, Hoshizaki does not hesitate to speak about his conviction and jail sentence. In fact, he has spent much of the last 30 years calling attention to those who resisted, even though his stance is still met with disapproval from the members of the Japanese American community. Proudly, he wears a t-shirt that spells out the principle of which he still avows. No person should be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law.
In addition, he continues to fight for acknowledgement of the 63 men once labeled disloyal. As Hoshizaki puts it, we were written out of Japanese American history, our story of draft resistance to regain our civil rights buried and forgotten. In his own quiet, steadfast way, he continues to be the heart and voice of the ongoing struggle to preserve the American ideals of liberty and justice for all.
Tak Ogawa moved to Wyoming soon after the war to farm. At 16, Tak enlisted in the Navy. The year was 1941. Not long after his basic training at Farga Naval Training Base at Lake Pend Oriel came December 7, 1941, and with it the news of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. He said, "I was all of a sudden classed as 4C. Do you know what 4C is? Enemy aliens. They let us go. They let all the Japanese in service go. They didn't want to have anything to do with us.
With those orders, Talk made his way back to the family's Idaho Falls farm. He stated, "We were too far inland to get sent to an internment camp. They only sent folks along the coast to those camps." His family did have restrictions, though. They weren't allowed to travel more than 5 miles from home, and they couldn't own firearms or radios. "They took a lot from us," Talk said. Then, in 1946, despite being formally classified as an enemy alien, Talk was drafted into the Army after the war in Germany was over. He was inducted at Fort Douglas, Utah, went to basic training at Camp Hood, and then was stationed at Fort Bliss in El Paso.
When he got back, Heart Mountain was getting dismantled. Talk applied for the barrack lottery and ended up the owner of 111 acres and a barrack from the internment camp. He was only 23 at the time. He stated, "They just cut the barracks in half, and then I had it trucked onto the property for $150. I didn't do anything to it, didn't even level it up. I just closed off one end, set it down on concrete blocks, and moved in."
Forrest Allen was yet another homesteader. After serving as a flight engineer during World War II, Allen came back to the States and put his name in a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation drawing for homesteads near Heart Mountain. In 1948, his name was drawn. Some of his land had already been used for farming beforehand by Heart Mountain inmates, which made it easier to farm. His success in farming helped him raise $1 million for the Northwest College Foundation.
There have been many barracks that have been repurposed. They each have individual stories to tell. Each have multiple people they have housed. They were the homes of Japanese and then sold to homesteaders. Without them, many farmers would not have come to Wyoming. Even some of the worst events in the nation's history can have some positive outcomes. It is just important that we remember what we did.